Chapter 1. The Arrival of Egos. On an unnamed tropical island miles from civilization, surrounded by the sort of security detail one would expect at a major war zone, the world's three most infamous leaders arrive. Each has made a grand entrance by private plane, and their entourages seem more like small armies than mere staff, flanking them in formation. Putin is the first to arrive, striding off his jet with the stoic, icy demeanor of someone who's already mentally conquered the island. His entrance is no accident. He insisted on being the first, claiming it gave him tactical advantage, though no one is sure what tactical advantage there is to standing alone on an empty tarmac. Putin's outfit is as crisp as a soldier on parade, adorned with medals of dubious origin, each one selected to remind his counterparts of his supposed battle-tested wisdom. As he surveys the landscape, he mentally maps out every potential ambush point, as if he's preparing for guerrilla warfare rather than a diplomatic meeting. Moments later, the whir of Trump's plane can be heard, approaching like a loud, gaudy commercial. When it lands, out steps Trump, dressed like a confused tourist, in a Hawaiian shirt paired with his signature red baseball cap, emblazoned with MAGA. He has a swagger about him, nodding and waving to an invisible crowd. He spends a good few minutes examining the island, already envisioning resorts, casinos, and hotels, mentally calculating potential property values. He waves at Putin, whom he can barely see in the distance, then shouts at his aides to get some brochures ready for the Trump Island project. And finally, as if to make a dramatic entrance, a small fleet of identical black SUVs pulls up to the runway. Jong Un steps out, surrounded by bodyguards who seem to be doing more posing than actual guarding. Each of them carries a suitcase chained to their wrist, further heightening the mystery around Kim's intentions. As they join Putin and Trump on the tarmac, Kim makes a point of looking past them, as if the view of the ocean holds more interest than either of his supposed allies. Chapter 2. The Welcome Feast. Their first night is kicked off with a grand welcome feast, prepared by a local chef who's equally baffled and terrified to be catering to such volatile guests. The table is overloaded with a spread of exotic fruits, grilled seafood, and a variety of cocktails that the chef hastily prepared, relying more on imagination than any actual recipes. The drinks are bizarrely colorful and come with tropical garnishes, none of which seem particularly appetizing. Putin takes one look at the neon blue concoction in front of him, raises an eyebrow, and mutters something in Russian that the translator politely declines to repeat. Trump, always keen to make a scene, clinks his glass loudly, toasting to future cooperation, in a tone that suggests he's ready to buy out the island right then and there. Kim, meanwhile, eyes his glass suspiciously, as if he's calculating the odds of it being poisoned, before finally taking a tentative sip. The conversation is awkward at best. They exchange strained pleasantries, each one making a poor attempt at small talk. Putin mentions the weather in Moscow. Trump brings up his record-breaking crowd sizes, and Kim, seemingly indifferent, nods absently. Tensions rise as they each size each other up, silently judging one another's choice of food, drink, and attire. Trump, in a bout of misplaced enthusiasm, starts comparing the island to Mar-a-Lago, insisting it could become the next big thing, if only he had control. "We could put in a golf course over there," he says, pointing to a hill covered in dense jungle. Putin chuckles, half listening, as he sharpens a small knife he produced from who knows where, his eyes narrowing every time Trump says the word deal. Kim, meanwhile, is now fixated on a plate of grilled squid, examining it as if it might contain a hidden message. Chapter 3. The Negotiation begins. After the meal, they retire to a private hut, where the real discussion is supposed to take place. The hut has been designed to look like a Cold War bunker, complete with a flickering overhead light and several old maps scattered across the table. It's stiflingly hot inside, but none of them will admit it. They each pretend to be perfectly comfortable, even as sweat starts to pool on their brows. Putin leans back, eyeing his counterparts with a look that suggests he's already calculated all their weaknesses. He decides to break the silence. "I see you're both men of ambition," he says, his voice low and almost threatening. "But power requires discipline. That's something we understand in Russia." He pauses, looking pointedly at Trump, then adds, "I once tamed a tiger with my bare hands." Trump, not to be outdone, immediately jumps in. "Oh yeah? That's nothing," he says, as if wrestling wild animals is an everyday feat. "I once fought off a shark near Mar-a-Lago. Huge shark, probably the biggest one you've ever seen." The truth, of course, is far less dramatic, involving a minor incident with a crab in a pool. But Trump is in no mood for factual accuracy. Kim, watching the absurd exchange, shrugs and mutters, "I don't play with animals. I play with fire." He flicks a lighter on and off, letting the flame dance for a few seconds before extinguishing it with a smug grin. The others glance at him, momentarily unsure whether he's just being poetic or if he's actually implying something dangerous. Either way, it adds an air of menace that neither Putin nor Trump can quite match. Chapter 4: Escalating Egos and Bizarre Bargains. The conversation devolves into a strange mix of boasts and veiled threats. Trump leans in, boasting about his wealth and insisting he could buy out either of you 10 times over. Putin counters by subtly hinting that he has compromising files on certain American officials, leaving Trump visibly nervous. Kim, feeling left out, makes a vague comment about having exclusive access to Hollywood movies within days of their release, which only earns him puzzled stares. At one point, Putin mentions a recent training exercise involving Russian forces near Alaska, while Trump loudly insists the US has the biggest military budget in history. Kim, not to be outdone, starts rambling about a secret weapon that would make any missile defense system obsolete. Each claim is increasingly more absurd, yet they all maintain an air of deadpan seriousness. Just when the tension seems unbearable, the hut's door creaks open, and a local waiter appears with another round of cocktails, this time a strange green mix that looks more like algae than alcohol. None of them want to appear weak, so they each take a sip, grimacing as they realize it tastes as awful as it looks. Trump forces a grin, proclaiming it fantastic, while Putin downs it in one gulp without flinching. Kim takes a small sip, then discreetly pours the rest into a potted plant. Chapter 5: The Midnight Power Play. As the night wears on, paranoia starts to take over. Each leader is now convinced that the others are plotting some sort of scheme. They begin subtly probing each other, trying to glean information through pointed questions and cryptic statements. Putin excuses himself for a walk, though he spends more time mapping out hiding spots along the beach than actually enjoying the view. He stashes a flask of vodka and a satellite phone in a nearby tree, just in case. Trump watches him disappear into the darkness and, convinced he's up to something, decides to do some exploring of his own. He wanders into the jungle, muttering about making sure everything's secure, and manages to get lost for a solid 20 minutes before stumbling back, pretending he knew exactly where he was the whole time. Meanwhile, Kim has instructed his entourage to dig a series of shallow trenches around the hut for security purposes. They work in silence, their faces expressionless, while the other two look on, both impressed and slightly disturbed by the efficiency. Putin nearly trips over one of the trenches when he returns, cursing under his breath as he glares at Kim, who simply smirks and says nothing. Chapter 6: The Team-Building Challenge. The next morning, after a tense, silent breakfast, Trump proposes a team-building exercise, an obstacle course through the jungle to prove their physical prowess. Putin, ever the tactician, accepts immediately, relishing the chance to demonstrate his superior fitness. Kim reluctantly agrees, though he assigns 2 of his bodyguards to carry him through the rougher sections. The course turns into a chaotic mess. Putin moves swiftly, calculating each step with military precision, while Trump, determined to keep up, barrels through like a bull in a china shop. He trips over a vine, scrambles to his feet, and loudly insists he's just warming up. Kim, meanwhile, has his bodyguards practically carrying him, occasionally shouting vague orders about strategy and keeping a low profile. By the end, they're all covered in mud, scratches, and bruises, but none of them will admit they're sore. They exchange strained nods, each one convinced they've won Chapter 7, the Great Island Heist. After their exhausting morning, the 3 leaders return to their makeshift headquarters, a rickety hut filled with maps, conspiracy theories, and an inexplicable number of coconut shells. They're drenched in sweat, exhausted from the obstacle course, but more importantly, their egos are bruised. In a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand, Trump suggests a friendly game of who can steal the most valuable thing from the hut. Putin, intrigued, narrows his eyes and asks, "What are the stakes?" Trump, ever the showman, declares, "The loser has to do a round of karaoke for all the locals tonight." Kim, catching on to the competitive spirit, smirks and quickly raises the stakes further. Loser also buys dinner for everyone tomorrow. With a mix of rivalry and absurdity, they agree, each fully convinced of their imminent victory. The game quickly devolves into a ridiculous contest of increasingly absurd thefts. Putin, being stealthy, slips out of the hut and makes his way to the kitchen, quietly snagging a bottle of the chef's best rum. He hides it in the folds of his military uniform, chuckling at the sheer audacity of it all. Meanwhile, Trump, never one to miss an opportunity for self-promotion, decides to take a selfie with the chef, claiming it's a business meeting. While the chef, confused, poses awkwardly, Trump subtly swipes a decorative pineapple off the counter, holding it up triumphantly for his entourage to photograph. Kim, not wanting to be outdone, roams through the hut and finds a coconut carved with a caricature of himself. He smirks, thinking it's a trophy worthy of his collection. But he also has his sights on something bigger. He decides to commandeer a nearby inflatable flamingo that seems far more valuable than any prize. They'll think twice before messing with the supreme leader now, he thinks as he drags it back, grinning from ear to ear. By the end of the day, they reconvene, each showing off their ill-gotten gains. Putin produces the rum with a flourish, Trump brandishes the pineapple like a trophy, and Kim rolls in with the inflatable flamingo. The atmosphere is electric, laughter fills the air, and for a moment, they are just 3 ridiculous leaders playing a ludicrous game. But then, as they reflect on their absurd heist, it dawns on them that they've all just been caught up in the bizarre charm of their tropical island prison. Chapter 8: The Karaoke Disaster. As the sun begins to set, it's time for the karaoke showdown that they had all been avoiding. Each of them has secretly dreaded this moment, but their competitive nature won't allow them to back down now. Trump, equipped with an overly confident swagger, decides he'll go first. He struts up to the makeshift stage, which is merely a few wooden pallets stacked precariously on top of each other. The locals, curious about the spectacle, gather around, some recording on their phones while others laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. Trump grabs the microphone and announces, "You're about to witness the greatest performance of your life." The locals chuckle, but Trump is oblivious to their amusement. He starts belting out a heavily altered version of Macho Man, changing the lyrics to something about being a macho leader. It's a cringe-worthy rendition that leaves everyone wincing, yet somehow, he believes he's smashing it. The locals, caught between laughter and disbelief, start clapping along, thinking it's all part of the show. Next up is Putin, who stands up, and with a serious expression, picks a classic Russian song. He leans into the microphone, channeling his inner bard. The crowd, suddenly subdued, listens intently. His deep voice resonates through the air, and for a moment, They all forget that they're witnessing a karaoke battle among world leaders. Kim is next, and he's determined to steal the show. He grabs the microphone and starts a wild rendition of Gangnam Style. The locals go wild, dancing and laughing, while Trump and Putin watch in confusion. They didn't see this coming at all. By the time they finish, all three leaders are left breathless, drenched in sweat, but absolutely convinced they've won. Trump, of course, insists that he definitely had the best performance, while Putin shrugs, maintaining his cool demeanor. Kim, looking smug, declares, "Next time, I'll take you both on in a real contest." As they leave the stage, Kim can't help but smile. Now that was a true display of power, he thinks, feeling utterly invincible for the first time all night. Chapter 9. The Dawn of Discontent. The following morning, the island is a mess of empty bottles, coconut husks, and disheveled leaders nursing hangovers the size of small nations. The tropical sun beams down mercilessly, making it impossible to ignore the throbbing headaches and regret that each one of them feels. Trump stumbles out first, squinting at the sun. "Who thought karaoke was a good idea?" he groans, rubbing his temples. He grabs a coconut for breakfast, proclaiming it the breakfast of champions. Putin follows shortly after, adjusting his uniform and glaring at the locals who dare to laugh at his disheveled appearance. "I thought we agreed on professionalism," he snaps, clearly irked that his reputation might have taken a hit during last night's antics. Kim emerges last, a wide grin plastered on his face, looking as if he's just returned from a triumphant victory tour. "Good morning, my friends. I hope you're ready for another round of challenges." Despite their previous night's foolishness, a lingering tension hangs in the air. They gather for breakfast, and the conversation quickly turns sour. Trump begins to complain about fake news surrounding the karaoke night, claiming that the recordings have gone viral and people are mocking him. Putin, always the opportunist, suggests he could send a few agents to handle the situation. Kim, sensing the opportunity for mischief, leans in. "What if we turn this into an opportunity? Let's host a world leaders contest on the island. We could challenge our rivals and showcase our power." The idea sounds absurd, yet they're all intrigued. They start brainstorming, proposing ridiculous contests involving everything from hula hooping to an inflatable boat race, convinced it would make for excellent entertainment and a chance to one-up each other. Chapter 10. The Grand Contest. As the day progresses, they set up for their bizarre competition, drawing more locals to witness the spectacle. The first event is hula hooping, a sight that is as absurd as it sounds. Each leader steps up in turn, attempting to spin the hula hoop around their waist. Trump goes first, grinning and managing to keep the hoop up for a solid 10 seconds before it falls to his ankles. "This is rigged," he exclaims, immediately blaming the locals for not providing the best hoops. Putin, undeterred, takes his turn. He sways his hips like he's done it 1,000 times before, maintaining his composure. The crowd cheers, chanting his name, which seems to inflate his ego even further. Finally, Kim steps up, and the locals explode into cheers. He gyrates effortlessly, the hoop dancing around him like a master. He finally stops, arms raised in triumph, while Trump and Putin stare in disbelief. Next up is the inflatable boat race. They're given ridiculous-looking inflatable flamingos and unicorns for their race across a small lagoon. Trump hops on the flamingo, claiming it's the best boat. Kim jumps on a unicorn, grinning like a child, while Putin takes the last remaining flamingo, muttering about how he prefers being in control. The race begins with a loud horn, and they're off, paddling furiously in their respective inflatable crafts. Trump, distracted by the crowd's laughter, starts waving to them instead of paddling. Kim, meanwhile, is shrieking with delight, practically screaming as he races ahead. Putin remains stoic, focused, and determined, as he silently plots the best way to seize victory. Just when it seems Kim might win, Trump accidentally collides with him, causing a spectacular splash that sends both leaders tumbling into the water. The locals roar with laughter, the sight of their leaders splashing around in the lagoon a comical highlight of the day. Putin, who remained dry through the chaos, glances down at the two flailing figures and can't help but smirk. In the end, as they crawl back to shore, drenched and sputtering, they find themselves laughing uncontrollably at the absurdity of the situation. Each one of them, despite their competitive spirit, begins to realize that perhaps they've all lost something in the ridiculous game they've been playing. As the sun sets over the island, they sit together, still damp but reveling in the moment, an unspoken bond forming amidst the madness. They may be rivals on the world stage, but for now, they are simply three ridiculous leaders sharing a laugh and contemplating the oddity of their friendship forged in a tropical paradise. With their egos momentarily softened and camaraderie bubbling beneath the surface, they start planning their next adventure, already plotting new challenges for their next summit. They might be the world's most powerful men, but they are also just a bunch of fools playing games under the sun.